Subcommittees will come to order, this being a joint meeting of the Homeland Security and Legislative Branch Appropriations Subcommittees. And today we're happy to welcome Director Sullivan and Chief Morse to this joint hearing. We'll mainly be discussing the roles that both the Secret Service and the Capitol Police played in planning and then maintaining security and public safety at the 56th presidential inauguration. First, I want to recognize the Secret Service's recent work and provide some context for today's hearing. The 2008 campaign was the longest and most widely attended in Secret Service history. The agency started protection for then-candidate Obama much earlier than any previous candidate. Throughout the campaign, Senators Obama and McCain attracted record crowds. After the election, the president-elect continued to lead extraordinarily large rallies and meetings. It's a remarkable achievement and the result of the hard work and dedication of thousands of agents that the 2008 campaign and transition functioned smoothly and safely. By virtue of North Carolina being a battleground state, I had the opportunity to witness Secret Service in action protecting candidate Obama among the throngs of people at his events. I was very impressed by the professionalism and dedication of the men and women under your command. Director Sullivan, thank you for everything your agency did to protect our candidates and their families throughout a uniquely challenging election season. There was also much about the inaugural celebrations that went well. Nearly 2 million people witnessed President Obama's swearing in, and there was not a single security-related incident, arrest, or serious injury. Spectators watching the festivities on television saw a remarkable event, so therefore I congratulate both of you for a day that required extraordinary preparation and coordination, and in most respects was successful. However, not in all respects. We're all aware that not everything went well on Inauguration days. Thousands could not enjoy the festivities since they were stuck in large, amorphous crowds outside the Capitol grounds. Others were trapped in the tunnel beneath the Capitol reflecting pool. As I'm sure other colleagues will attest today, there were constituents from each of our districts who traveled often at great expense and personal sacrifice to witness this historic day. And we can apologize for what led to their disappointment, but I think we owe them more than that. I think we need to review what happened so we have an accurate account, and also we can prevent similar mistakes in the future. The Secret Service, which led both security planning for the inaugural and the after-action review of the day's challenges, has made some recommendations for improvements in a report just released. And we look forward to discussing those proposals with you today. The viewing areas with the worst problems were the blue and purple ticketed sections, which were behind the seated section on the Capitol grounds. You can see these areas on our monitors. The silver section west of the Capitol reflecting pool also had problems, which appear to have been exacerbated by reducing checkpoints to a single entry for the 100,000 people holding silver tickets. From the post-inaugural report, crowding problems were apparent as early as 5 a.m. when people started arriving at the Capitol entry gates. However, without clear direction or line markers, orderly lines failed to develop and instead turned into large mobs waiting for the gates to open. As people continued arriving, additional problems developed. Security barricades, street closures, dense crowds made for a confusing and frustrating trek. At some point, people waiting to enter the purple section went into the northbound tube of the 3rd Street Tunnel, even though this area was supposed to be closed to pedestrians, reserved for emergency vehicles. Thousands of people got stuck in the tunnel for hours, while no law enforcement agency did anything, as far as we can tell, to assist them or clear the congestion. The after-action report notes how a civil disturbance unit observed conditions in the tunnel but did not do anything to clear the crowd since the people were peacefully waiting. I'd like to know more about how this decision was made and why it was considered safe for people to stand literally feet away from speeding emergency vehicles. After the gates opened, it quickly became clear there was no effective system to validate visitors' tickets and that entry gates were much narrower than the magnetometer screening banks as illustrated by this photo on the monitor. Just look at that mass of people behind the pre-screening gates. The post-inaugural report claims that these entry points were adequate to process all attendees. You have to ask what reasoning lay behind the creation of such bottlenecks. As a final point, I'd like everyone to look at the satellite image on the monitor. The photograph was taken about 40 minutes before the actual swearing in. you can see, or maybe you can, that the purple, blue, and silver sections were not anywhere near capacity, and that massive crowds were still awaiting entry at the backed-up checkpoints. I want to be clear today that our intent is constructive, to determine what happened, to account for problems, and to identify solutions. We have to make sure this doesn't happen again. I'm going to ask each of you gentlemen to summarize your comments in a 5-minute oral presentation. Of course, we'll enter your full statements in the record. I'm going to ask Director Sullivan to begin, followed by Chief Morse. But before we start, I want to turn to our distinguished ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to Director Sullivan and Chief Morris. As I read through the review of the inauguration, I'm struck by 4 key facts. And some of these are repetitive to what the chairman has said. 1, largest crowd to ever attend an event on the National Mall, some 2 million people. No arrests, no injuries, no security incidents of any kind. So from a safety and security point of view, the inauguration was unquestionably a remarkable success. Now, as many as 10,000 people appear to have been inadvertently restricted from gaining access to the event, and that is indeed an unfortunate and regrettable occurrence. But from my read of the inauguration report, the problems with gaining access to the standing areas around the Capitol were a result of poor crowd control, poor signage, poor ticketing, and poor planning. These are issues that can only be partially addressed by today's witnesses, because responsibility for many of the decisions that led to these problems largely fell under the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, chaired by Senator Feinstein, which is not even represented here today in this hearing. So I think we have a number of missing witnesses. Having said that, the report also highlights a number of areas for improvement, areas I hope to learn more about and lessons learned that I fully expect to be applied to future security events. But from my vantage point on the Homeland Security Subcommittee, I'm concerned that as we review the inauguration, we might lose sight of the phenomenally intense year the Secret Service has just endured, not to mention the Capitol Police. From protecting the Secret Service from protecting the largest number of protectees in the agency's history, to a protracted presidential campaign with multiple candidates, record-sized crowds, to a present climate of heightened demands on both the protective and investigative missions. The Secret Service is in the midst of what is probably its most challenging period since its inception in 1856. Director Sullivan, as much as I want to better understand the facts surrounding the inauguration, I also want to hear how the Secret Service is adapting to this period of intensifying threats to our nation's leaders as well as threats to our financial system at a time when our economy is perhaps as fragile as it has ever been. So I thank the witnesses for appearing with us today as we probe into the problems of the inauguration. Do not mistake our concern for a lack of appreciation for your agency's efforts to protect the national leadership and keep visitors to the Capitol safe and secure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Wasserman-Schultz, the chairman of the Legislative Branch Subcommittee.
Thank you, Chairman Price, and let me associate myself with your opening remarks, which summarize many of the basic questions and concerns that this hearing is intended to raise. While it is important to establish some lessons learned, we must not forget the thousands of people who had tickets to the inauguration but were left out of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the swearing-in of our nation's first African-American president. While we must learn how to avoid the type of problems which occurred in the 3rd Street Tunnel and in the blue, purple, and silver ticket screening areas, it is also important to use this hearing as a forum to acknowledge the serious difficulties and disappointment experienced by many of our constituents. For thousands of people who came to Washington at great effort and expense to celebrate a historic day in American history, January 20th, 2009, is now a traumatic memory of missed opportunity and disappointment. And for many who were stuck in the aptly named Purple Tunnel of Doom and in similar areas in the general vicinity, this memory is not merely disappointment, but also one of real fear and panic. We have received statements for the record from some of our constituents who experienced many of the failures that occurred that day. They not only describe in very real terms what they saw, but they raise a number of key questions which the review team report does not adequately answer. One of these statements, which has been circulated to the committee, was submitted by Marisa McNee and David Meyer, who are here with us this afternoon, and we appreciate your attendance. They're over there. These two individuals organized a Facebook group of more than 6,000 individuals who shared their experiences about the events on Inauguration Day. This statement is not an angry attack on the system which failed them, but rather a helpful summary of their observations and suggestions for questions that we will hope to address this afternoon. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to read this full statement, which I will then insert into the record, and I ask that our witnesses provide a detailed response to the questions which are raised.
Without objection.
Thank you. We, Marisa McNee and David Meyer, have prepared a statement based on our personal experiences on Inauguration Day and as organizers of a group formed on Facebook to deal with the initial confusion, misinformation, and misstatements from public officials. We have spent hundreds of hours reviewing thousands of stories, photographs, and videos from purple, blue, and silver ticket holders who were unable to get into the inaugural ceremony and/or were placed in a dangerous situation while attempting to get into the ceremony. It is from that perspective that we offer this statement to you today. The recommendations outlined in the executive summary of the multi-agency report seem well considered. They correctly address three central problems that contributed to the inaugural difficulties: poor interagency coordination, both during the planning process and on Inauguration Day, poor communication with attendees, and questionable assumptions built into the planning process. Unfortunately, it is not possible to judge whether the recommendations are adequate to the task of preventing a recurrence in 2013. The executive summary does not sufficiently explain where the 2008-2009 processes broke down. Some of the difficulties can be reconstructed from the specific recommendations, but public participation in the planning process should not be contingent on speculative leaps. Specific recommendations were introduced with brief narrative overviews. Those narratives are in tension with observations of many attendees. Some specific issues. The crowd management section highlights complications caused by unexpectedly large numbers of early attendees. The mall officially opened at 4 a.m. and Metro Rail began running at the same time. Arrive early was a constant refrain in the press and on television, yet most of the major problems did not arise until after the mall officially opened. Both the pre-screening and the crowd management sections blame overcrowded and uncontrolled lines on the commingling of unticketed and ticketed attendees. Very few attendees seem to agree that this was a significant factor. The police frequently used bullhorns to inform people in the purple ticket queuing area that it was for purple ticket holders only. The crowd would typically respond by waving their tickets in the air. This seems to suggest the police continued to operate under the assumption they were communicating with unticketed attendees despite rather obvious evidence to the contrary. The 3rd Street Tunnel section claims that attendees' use of the 3rd Street Tunnel was unexpected, yet uniformed officers were directing people into the tunnel as early as 5:30 according to eyewitness accounts. Moreover, regardless of the spontaneity of crowd accumulation in the tunnel, there is no explanation for why crowds were allowed to remain there if they were not supposed to be there. The 3rd Street Tunnel section and the Multi-Agency Communications Center, MAC section, suggest that responsible officials didn't become fully aware of the magnitude of the tunnel problem until after the fact. The MAC section notes that calls from attendees were dismissed because of a lack of clarity by the caller. Yet security officials regularly drove through the tunnel, and there were likely security cameras monitoring the situation. Attendees have been remarkably public-spirited about the inaugural difficulties. They remained in good spirits under trying circumstances on January 20th. They have remained engaged and committed over the last 2 months to ensuring that we do not confront similar problems in 2013. Public participation in the investigation is an asset to those seeking to understand what went wrong. It is crucial that we are allowed to participate in the process. We need more basic factual information to be able to do so. We understand the legitimate concerns involved in publicizing security planning information. At minimum, though, an additional summary account of the findings of the review process should be produced. Better yet, a judiciously redacted version of the full report should be made available. Thank you for your attention and time and attention to this issue. Mr. Chairman, I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of the security agencies for the extraordinary level of effort which they put into the planning for and execution of the inaugural event. The 1.8 million people who came to Washington to witness the swearing-in ceremonies here at the Capitol is by far the largest crowd ever to gather in Washington. While everyone here recognizes that it was far from perfect, the fact that there were no arrests or serious injuries is a remarkable accomplishment. This achievement during a period of very real terrorist threats is a testament to the hard work and skill of the security teams which were assembled. I also want to thank the Inauguration Review Team for the report which they prepared. While no plan can provide for every eventuality, this review makes more than 40 specific recommendations, which I believe should and will be taken very seriously. Mr. Chairman, before closing, I believe that our review must also ask broader questions about the inauguration beyond those associated with the ticket screening and tunnel problems. We must ask our witnesses how, based on their experience with the inauguration of Barack Obama, the Capitol complex, and the National Mall, we can be prepared to handle crowds of 2 million people or more during a period of elevated terrorist threats. How can our regional transportation systems be adequately modified to transport this size crowd? What needs to be done to prepare the National Mall to safely hold this volume of spectators? What support does the District of Columbia need at the local level to assist with an event of this size? And what can be done to accommodate individuals who are less mobile, who may not be capable of standing in a security line for hours or more? While it's not always productive to deal in hypotheticals, we must look at this from the standpoint of what could have happened. What if, God forbid, there had been some event or circumstance which would have required evacuation of the President, the Congress, and the public? Could that have been done safely? After reading the report and talking to many of my own constituents, I am frankly amazed that there were not bigger problems. We are dealing with some basic fundamentals of democracy at our hearing today. We are a very large and open nation. We believe in and want to foster a participatory democracy. The peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next may well be the finest single example of American democracy. Preserving the American people's ability to participate in this historic event as witnesses is extremely important. While we succeeded in protecting the president and preventing injury to the public, we failed as a country in providing access for thousands of Americans who should have had the ability to witness this historic inauguration. I believe that this hearing should provide us with an opportunity to step back and take a closer look at some of the issues that will affect future inaugural and highly attended events. Thank you very much.
Mr. Latourette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be mercifully brief. I want to add my voice to commend the Secret Service and the Capitol Police for the job they did, not only on January 20th, but in all the months leading up to January 20th. I took a picture, not from the satellite, but from our perch on the west front of the Capitol, of the humanity stretching from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial. And the fact that that many people were there and it went off without a hitch in terms of safety is indeed a reason that you gentlemen and your agency should be commended. I noticed in your opening remarks, Mr. Chairman, as you were applauding the Secret Service for the protection of presidential candidates, you didn't indicate you were at any McCain rallies in North Carolina, just the Obama ones. And I'm sure that the Secret Service did a nice job protecting the Senator McCain as well in North Carolina. I also have read the IRT report, and just sort of as a heads up when it comes time to talk about questions, there is a question about the coordination with your agencies and the Joint Committee, as Mr. Rogers mentioned, and I would like to explore that, so if you just sort of be thinking about that. And I appreciate it very much and yield back my time.
Thank you. We welcome our full committee chairman, Mr. Obey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just make a few offhand remarks about some things that I saw and some things that I didn't see on that day. I certainly respect every agency before us today, and I recognize that you've got difficult jobs and that you are fine public servants. But I was nonetheless extremely disturbed by a number of events that occurred on that day, which is why I asked these two subcommittees to hold this hearing today. And in fact, we could just as easily have had other parties testifying here as well. The Park Service for one, and the DC Police for another. Let me simply recite what I saw that day and then refer to some things I didn't see, but about which I was told. We had originally been told by the Sergeant at Arms that for members of Congress to get into the Capitol, if we were coming from Virginia, we should arrive at a certain checkpoint on George Washington Parkway, hopefully before 6 in the morning. I did that, and as a practical matter, no one at that checkpoint had the foggiest idea that they were supposed to let anybody in. Fortunately, a Park Service superior eventually showed up and cleared up the problem, but it was obvious from the first moment that there was confusion and lack of adequate communication. Then we had been told to take the 14th Street exit onto Constitution Avenue, or onto Independence Avenue, which we did, arriving there very early in the morning. We got almost down to the Smithsonian Castle when traffic was blocked, and D.C. police officers began pounding on several cars, including mine, simply saying, "Turn around, go back, go back, go back." When we attempted to find out where we were supposed to go, we were told, "Never mind, just move it, just move it, just move it." And again, people pounding the car. So we went down to the other end of the avenue, and were again told to turn around, go back the other way. It took some 45 minutes just sitting there before we were able to finally, thanks to Bill Livingood, find an alternative route to the Capitol. I can understand a certain amount of confusion, but that was not confusion, that was madcap chaos that I saw on that street. And you would, I don't know whether the lack of coherence on the part of the people on the beat was as a result of poor training or something else, but their action certainly left something to be desired. That's what I saw. What I didn't see, but what I was told about afterwards, was what happened to numerous constituents of mine, some of whom were reduced to tears because after taking the time to come, after spending their money to come, after bringing their kids, they didn't get anywhere near that inaugural. And I heard tale after tale of chaos from people who had the correct tickets, from people who were stuck in that tunnel. And I guess all I could think of is if a member of Congress like myself had been treated the way we were treated that morning, I hate to think what an average constituent of mine was treated like. And so while I certainly recognize all of the good service that your agencies and the other two that I mentioned have provided, it nonetheless was a scene of chaos that I certainly don't want to see repeated again. And I would like to know exactly what measures are being taken to see to it that 4 years from now, it does not happen again, because what was supposed to be a positive experience for my constituents turned into an embittering one. And there are scars. I mean, these people believed in the change that they thought they had voted for. They wanted to participate in a great event, and they were denied it because of chaos, lack of planning, or just poor organization. I'm not sure what the root causes were, but it has to be corrected. It has to change, and I think we need, in the last analysis, to talk not just to your two organizations today, but also to the D.C. police, because what I saw on their part was not pretty. And frankly, I did not appreciate the dismissive comments of the D.C. police chief, who seemed to downplay all of the problems as being just minor incidents. They were far from minor to the people who experienced them. And I would have appreciated a different attitude than the one that I saw exhibited by her. Having said that, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding the hearings. I will not be able to stay for much of the questioning, but I appreciate the fact that you're having the hearing today.
Thank you very much. Director Sullivan, please proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Obey, Chairman Price, Chairman Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Members Rogers, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Mr. Chairman, with the committee's permission, I will offer brief remarks and ask that my full statement be made part of the record. When I appeared before the committee last year, the Secret Service was in the middle of a historic presidential campaign. Some of the challenges we faced as an agency included the increased travel, staffing, and equipment demands associated with the competitive primary contest, massive crowds at campaign rallies across the country. In addition, there were numerous international travel stops by our other protectees. I would like to recognize the extraordinary personal sacrifice made by our special agents, uniform division officers, and administrative professional and technical support staff over the past 2 years. Whether it was providing candidate protection for 18 months or adjusting the security plan for the Democratic National Convention to accommodate the use of a 85,000-seat outdoor stadium, or securing presidential transition offices in 2 cities, the men and women of the U.S. Secret Service rose to meet the challenge. In fiscal year 2008, the Secret Service provided protection at over 5,000 travel stops for our protectees and over 2,000 travel stops for visiting heads of state. Candidate nominee travel stops are up 70% over the 2004 presidential campaign. Uniform division officers and Transportation Security Administration officers screened over 4.2 million people during this period, compared to 2.1 million people in 2004. Although designated National Special Security Events, or NSSEs, the Secret Service led security planning for 3 presidential debates, 1 vice presidential debate, the first visit to the United States by Pope Benedict XVI, the 16th United Nations General Assembly, IMF World Bank meetings, and the North American Leaders Summit. At the same time, we continued to perform our investigative mission in exemplary fashion. In FY 2008, our field offices closed over 7,000 financial crimes and other criminal cases, which resulted in the arrest of over 8,000 people. This included disrupting the largest identity theft case in our country's history. In addition, our asset seizures were up 200% from 2 years ago and up 100% from 1 year ago. Field offices also conducted more than 10,000 protective surveys and closed over 3,000 protective intelligence cases. Total arrests in fiscal year 2008 were up 22% over FY 2007. Since January 2008, the Secret Service completed security plans for 10 national security events, or NSSEs. The most recent NSSE was the presidential address to a joint session of Congress on February 24, 2009. Other recent NSSEs include the 2008 State of the Union Address, the Democratic and Republican National Conventions, the G20 Economic Summit, and the 56th Presidential Inauguration. The 56th Presidential Inauguration was a historic and proud moment for our country and one of the proudest moments of my career. I know this view is shared by all Secret Service employees and our law enforcement partners as well. Events went from January 17th through January 20th and included 5 separate NSSE designations: the pre-inaugural train trip with rallies in Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore, the Lincoln Memorial Concert, and the inauguration. For the inauguration alone, an estimated 2 million people gathered on the west front of the U.S. Capitol, the National Mall, and along Pennsylvania Avenue. While I'm proud of the fact that there were no arrests or major injuries reported, I would like to offer my sincere regret and apologies to ticket holders who were unable to get to their designated areas for the swearing-in ceremony at the U.S. Capitol. At the request of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the U.S. Secret Service, along with our law enforcement partners, completed a thorough review of this year's inauguration to identify specific problems and recommend changes to ensure that they do not occur again. Some of the problems we identified and have already begun to incorporate in our planning are establishment of a crowd control subcommittee, better utilization of signage for ticketed and non-ticketed guests, for better real-time situational awareness, monitor the internet, social networking sites such as Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, the opening of screening gates earlier, and pre-screening of ticketed guests much further away from the entry gate to ensure non-ticketed guests or guests with incorrect tickets do not unnecessarily interfere and delay the entry of properly ticketed guests. These are just a few of the recommendations that we have and will utilize at future events. The U.S. Secret Service owes a tremendous debt of gratitude to our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners and public safety officials throughout the country for their support during the 2008 campaign. Our collective goal when it comes to securing NSSEs and similar large events is to develop and implement an operational security plan that achieves two core objectives: provide a safe and secure environment for Secret Service protectees and other dignitaries, event participants, and the general public, and safeguard people's lawful freedoms of speech, assembly, and petition of government. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, this concludes my opening statement. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I'll be happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Morse?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Obie, and distinguished members of the committee. I also would like to make a opening statement, as well as ask you for your permission to submit a written statement for the record.
Thank you. We will submit your full statement of the record.
The inauguration of President Barack Obama presented planners with unique challenges associated with an unprecedented 1.8 million people who gathered in Washington, D.C. that day to experience the excitement of the inauguration. The primary focus was ensuring safety and security of the assembled dignitaries and the public while protecting the event from disruption. The overall security plan had to balance between security and access. On Capitol Hill, the number of ticketed guests was consistent with prior inaugurations. However, we expected a larger percentage of ticket holders to attend this inauguration than in the past. For this reason, overflow areas were identified to handle expected attendance. To help guide ticketed guests to the Capitol, police officers and civilian staff were posted at various metro stops and intersections along the pedestrian routes leading to the gates. Additionally, elevated signs, banner bridges, and variable message boards were used throughout the Capitol complex to guide and direct guests. The plan to ensure access of all ticketed guests onto the West Front was not realized. While we expected and planned for almost 2 million people to descend on the core area of the city, we had no benchmark or historical perspective to forecast the cascading effect this size crowd would have on inaugural events, particularly access to the swearing-in ceremony, the mall, and the parade route. On January 20th, people began arriving at gates on the mall before 4 a.m. In fact, the mall between 4th and 7th Streets filled to capacity by 6:30. This had never happened before in previous inaugurations. At the Capitol, all gates for ticketed guests opened between 7:35 and 8:10 a.m. As we screened the crowds, it became evident that both ticketed and non-ticketed guests were mixed together in lines waiting to be screened. As people continued to enter the city and migrate toward the Capitol, crowd management issues compounded, particularly areas around the blue and purple gates where crowds with different destinations were merging. Due to the resulting congestion, attempts by law enforcement officers to relieve crowd pressure were ineffective or resulted in people being directed to stage in areas never intended for pedestrian queuing. The northbound tube of the 3rd Street Tunnel as one example. Further, poor upchanneling or miscommunication of information from the field to the officials at the various law enforcement command centers hindered situational awareness and led to crowd management problems in those areas, and that did not allow us to properly address or correct them. We understand the disappointment and the frustrations of those who were eager to witness this historic event and were not able to access their ticketed locations. As deliberate and thoughtful as the planning process was, unanticipated challenges manifested themselves during the execution of the plan on the day of the event. The challenges we collectively confronted or later discovered include and control unified decision-making and positioning of resources to react and manage unpredictable actions of large masses of people. In the end, the impact of the arrival and movement of almost 2 million visitors served to strain even the best of plans. Everyone who visited Capitol Hill, the mall, the parade route that day entered and left safely. We do regret that a number of people or ticketed guests were not admitted and left disappointed. We will work even harder in the future for future events to ensure that everything humanly possible is done to enhance the experience for all who travel to witness historic events in this nation's capital. We have jointly conducted a thorough after-action review of the 56th inauguration. The critical review resulted in recommendations to improve planning, communication, coordination, crowd management, and security operations. We will take the lessons learned, and we will develop and apply new procedures to improve our planning and operations as we continue to balance the requirements of security and accessibility to major events. Again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. As you've observed, votes have been called on the House floor. A series of 3 votes, we're told. We'll go just as far as we can in the questions until we have to leave, and then we'll resume this hearing after we return from the floor. Chief, I'd like to address my first questions to you, and it has to do with the area where many, if not most, of the problems seem to have developed, and that is in the huge crowds, as we saw on the monitor here a while ago. The huge crowds that develop between the metro stops and the entry checkpoints, the pre-screening checkpoints around the Capitol grounds. Your after-action report, or the Secret Service's after-action report, is not entirely clear about how many officers were posted there. However, it appears that even under the most generous count, fewer than 400, that's less than 20% of your force, appear to have been expected to handle the 250,000 people who showed up that day and who were entering in those areas. Let me just read you one excerpt from a constituent of mine, and this is one of the lucky ones. He got in finally, but here's what he said. "We got off at Capitol South and ran into chaos. Huge crowds and no officials to direct anyone anywhere. It was no crowd control that gridlocked the crowd up against the random barricades and choked the crowd from entering the security checkpoint. At 11:55, we finally got to security and were told to run in, bypassing metal detectors and screening of any kind. As we entered the area running, officers asked us to hold up our tickets as we ran by." Now, that raises obvious questions about how many people you had deployed, where they were, what their instructions were. We've even heard rumors that the Capitol Police turned down an offer from the D.C. National Guard to deploy a unit to help with crowd management. So I want to ask you how many officers were stationed outside the security perimeter of the Capitol grounds to manage the ticketed attendees at the swearing-in ceremonies? How did you determine this was an appropriate staffing level? Was this reviewed by anyone? Was it solely your determination? And Chief, did you or your agency decline any offers for assistance with crowd management, especially in these areas?
Thank you for your question, sir. With regard to personnel, I don't have the exact page here, but it was a little over 300, both sworn and civilian personnel, who were specifically assigned to the 4 metro stops, the routes to the ticketed gates, and at key intersections en route to those gates. They were supported by 15 variable message boards, billboard or signs, as well as posted signs along the route. They were wearing visibility or yellow vests, and also they were supporting the fact that each ticket would have the directions to the specific gate that they were supposed to gain access to. So those 300 personnel were only and specifically assigned to the 4 routes to the gates themselves. There were other personnel who were outside the secure perimeter who had other duties and responsibilities related to security and access of vehicles and vehicle control. But the over 300 personnel were directly assigned to facilitate movement from the metro stops that these folks were directed to go in order to access their gates.
That's 300 personnel for what you can estimate, I suppose, to be well over 200,000 people converging on these pre-screening points. How'd you arrive at that number, and did you turn down any offers of help from other agencies? Anyone review this?
The way we arrived at that number was previous inaugurations and the use of these personnel and how effective it was. Some of the things that obviously we've talked about in the report that hindered that are numerous. There were crowds merging in those areas, not just for the event itself. There were crowds that were merging there to utilize the 3rd Street Tunnel southbound to either go from the north side of the mall to the south side. There were parade gates in and around the Purple Gate area, the 2nd and C parade gate. There was another gate for parade gate at 3rd and C. People who were walking from RFK Stadium traversed that, both the north and south sides. So those were the combinations of people who were merging at those locations. And also, I just need to say that Capitol Hill and the ceremony itself was where all the signage and direction was. In the report, you'll see that, you know, signage throughout the city and messaging throughout the city was not as robust as it was on the Hill. Therefore, there was a lot of merging of crowds that were, going to other areas other than the ceremony itself. With regard to your question about the National Guard, yes, we did turn down that offer. That offer was not turned down because we didn't anticipate problems. We had requested other law enforcement agencies, federal law enforcement agencies, to assist us, and we gained cooperation through the NSSE structure of obtaining Custom and Border Patrol and Protection agents to assist us, as well as the Library of Congress Police, the GPO Police, and the Supreme Court Police. So we felt through the NSSC structure, the number of people that we requested, and the assignments and deployment that we had an adequate number of people to do the job.
Do you still feel that way? I mean, it doesn't seem to me that any one of those exacerbating factors that you mentioned should have been a surprise.
I think that, now after we have reviewed this, I think that we all have concluded that more signage throughout the city, more messaging throughout the city, more directions throughout the city, as well as more people to deconflict some of the situations that large crowds like this occur, that we can, deconflict that as well as we can. So yes, we feel that more people would be, a positive thing to have, as well as the communication throughout the city and not just on Capitol Hill and around the ceremony area.
Mr. Rogers.
Who was responsible for the signage and directions and crowd instructions overall?
With respect to the inaugural ceremony, it would be the Joint Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies and the Capitol Police Subcommittee, or the Capitol Hill Subcommittee, which is the NSSE committee.
Yeah. And citywide, who was in charge of that? The same?
Well,
No, that would have been the Metropolitan District Police Department working with the Department of Transportation, and again working with the...
Well, if I wanted to ask somebody about what went wrong with the signage and directions and instructions to the crowd about where to go and what to do, neither one of you can answer those questions, can you? It has to be the city police or the joint committee, is it not?
well, with respect to Capitol Hill and the Capitol Subcommittee, I think the subcommittee as well as JASIC are responsible for, ensuring that the tickets display directions to the appropriate gates, as well as the logistics of
Well, Mr.
signage
Chairman,
and
I,
others.
we can't get to the bottom of this if we don't have the relevant parties here.
Well, I believe Mr. Sullivan is, and his agency are the overall coordinating agency. So while we don't have every agency here, clearly the signage is the responsibility of the Joint Committee. We've established that.
Yeah.
We have the Metropolitan Police involved, the Park Police and others, but Mr. Sullivan, as the head of the agency under this committee's jurisdiction, I believe can answer questions about the responsibility of the whole range of agencies, even though he's not
Well,
personally responsible for
It
those.
was the responsibility, as I understand it, of the Joint Committee and the Metropolitan Police on the signage and directions, and that seems to be the proximate cause of the difficulties of that day. And I don't know how we can get to the bottom of this if those agencies aren't here to answer questions. These people weren't responsible for those, for doing the signage and the directions to the crowd. And so I don't know what we're doing here with
I would say, Congressman,
relevant
you know,
parties.
in regards to the Metropolitan Police, I would say that we could discuss that. They were and the Department of Transportation. They did everything but the Capitol. And, you know, we were part of those subcommittees. We were either the chair or the co-chair of those committees. So I think between myself and Special Agent in Charge O'Connor, who's here, we could give you some answers for those questions.
But the Joint Committee's not here, and they're the overall responsible organization. And I've got questions I'd like to ask them as well as the Metropolitan Police Department. And I appreciate, Mr. Director, you valiantly stepping forward and saying that you had overall jurisdiction, which you probably did, but the actual doing of the instructions and directions was not in your hands. And so, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. We will adjourn as briefly as possible and come back and resume after these votes. Subcommittee will come back to order, and we'll turn to Chairman Wasserman Schultz for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Morse, one of the things I just want to make sure that we clarify, and because a concern was expressed about the lack of the full group that was involved and served on the subcommittee, you serve on the planning subcommittee as well, correct? And you were involved in the coordination planning for leading up to the inauguration for the capital area.
As the chief of police, yes, overall in charge of operations security for the Capitol.
Thank you. And so you are available and you're able to answer questions related to that planning.
Yeah, the planning, we had a director who was reporting to the assistant chief of police, so I was routinely briefed on issues, daily briefings on the planning process.
Okay, and I mean, the assistant chief of police is here with you, so in the event that a question arises.
Yes, he could answer those.
Okay, great.
He has more direct knowledge of that than I might at a very high level.
Great. One of the concerns that I have, and it's one that I've spoken with the chief and the House Sergeant at Arms before, is when I was briefed on the security plans prior to the inauguration, one of the sort of things that stuck in my concern box was that there were more tickets issued than space available in the ticketed areas. And when I asked why we would do that for an event that was where unprecedented attendance was expected, the answer was unsettling. The answer was, well, that's because it's the way we've always done it. Basically, this is the way we've always done it. We issued the sergeant's response on behalf of all of you was that because we know that there are people that don't show up, we issue more tickets than we have space available because we know that we'll be able to accommodate them. And given that this was an expected, unprecedented turnout, and I know that concern was, from what I understand, expressed during your planning, why was that concern dropped and never dealt with?
The concern originally came because we did expect a higher attendance than previous inaugurations because of the significance and historic. So when we addressed the issue, we had to correct it by adding space within the security perimeter on the west front to accommodate the total of 240,000 people. The way you do that is through square footage multiplied by the number of people, and you look for that area within the secure perimeter to establish that as a ticketed area. So in previous inaugurations, the square footage that was set aside for yellow, orange, purple, blue would not have been sufficient to hold 241,000 people. So we simply added expansion spaces, specifically the kidneys, as we call them, on the west front, and the walkways on the northwest and southwest areas on First and Penn and First and Maryland's Avenue southwest. And that gave us the ability to facilitate that number of ticket holders within that area.
So the reason that concern was dropped is that you felt by adding the kidneys and the walkways that you were going to be able to accommodate the extra number of people that you expected to show up?
That's correct.
And do you think that planning proved helpful, or would you do it differently the next time? I mean, I can't imagine that the next time we went through an unprecedented anticipated crowd that we would issue more tickets than we have space for.
I would say that, yes, you will probably need expanded area. I know that a recommendation in the report is to change the recommended 3 square foot to the FEMA 5 square foot. When you do that, obviously, the area will not be as large, and that could lead to less tickets being issued.
And just an additional question. In reading the report, one of the recommendations was that the people who check tickets, which were Capitol Police for this inauguration, correct?
Yes.
That I
previous.
know I saw that one of the recommendations was that for the 2013 inauguration, and I guess inaugurations forward, that the host committee be asked to provide more volunteers to handle that that particular service, and be able to really significantly increase the number of people that you have available, so that you can focus on security and the magnetometers and the other things that police should be responsible for.
Yeah, let me just clarify that our police officers who were screeners, pre-screeners, were not just looking at validity of ticket, but they were also screening people for suspicious activity or any types of weapons or anything that would be adverse to the crowd. So, one piece of that is examining a ticket, which is fairly quick, and if need be, the validity of that ticket can be checked or validated. The recommendation, obviously, is in order to free up one of the many things that the police officer is responsible for at the gate itself.
My other question relates to the tunnels. One of that was the most difficult problem for me to understand. Can you tell the committee how that problem with the tunnels evolved and why corrective action wasn't taken earlier?
Yeah, I'll speak to this as the report indicates. What happened that morning was, as we have testified, is a cascading of events, the sheer multitude of people, and merging to go different places. We had RFK Stadium folks who were coming from the north and south. We had people from the north and south going to the parade route. We also had people traversing the tunnel to get from one side or the other, and there was a merge of people. The closing of the mall very early because of the crowds, people began to migrate toward the Capitol looking for ways to get onto the mall or into the event. One of the things that occurred because of that was people going down into areas that were not meant for people, simply as spillover, if you will. We saw this on Independence Avenue very early, and Mr. Obie had mentioned the number of people that were on Independence Avenue. That was simply because they couldn't get onto the mall, and the officers were working on moving them west as quickly as they could to find openings and gates to get them onto the mall. So people pushed down into the tunnel area. The tunnel, the southbound tube, which has been referred to as the Purple Tunnel, was never intended for people. It was intended for vehicular traffic, specifically emergency egress or access to situations that may occur. I'm sorry, the North Tunnel. My apologies. I'm even confused at this point between north and south. But the southbound tunnel was a pedestrian tube and was supposed to be used to flow pedestrians from the north and south. The northbound tube was a vehicular access only. As the two ways that you could get from the north or the south were either to go east of the Capitol and cross over at 2nd Street and proceed to whatever location that you were intending to go, or you could traverse the southbound tube of the 3rd Street Tunnel. So when officers were directing people to use the southbound tube of the tunnel, there were no physical barriers in the northbound tunnel to prevent people from going in it. Therefore, people who were headed down to the tunnel area to traverse ended up in the northbound tunnel. The report also indicates that there was a significant effort made by civil disturbance units who were sent to that area responsible for tunnel and any emergencies or crowd-controlled issues that may occur there. Those units in the report indicate that they found people in the northbound tube. It indicates that the crowd was orderly, and at that point, they left that area to deal with a more critical situation along the D Street corridor where people were merging. Therefore, there was no action to the chain of command, to Director Sullivan or myself or our level, that there was an issue or problem there that needed immediate attention or correcting. Probably about 11 o'clock, the assistant chief ordered purple ticket holders and blue ticket holders to begin being screened through the orange and yellow gates because those crowds had subsided. There was an opportunity to screen people through those gates. At that point, by doing so, inadvertently, the tunnel cleared because of the relief that was provided by screening the purple ticket holders through the yellow gate. So that is how people got into the tunnel. They were either directed, and there was no barrier to prevent them from going into the tube, or it was, they did not know where to go, so they went to the path of least resistance, and there was no barrier there to prevent them to go, and they've, formed a queue or line to the purple ticket gate.
We may well want to return to this, but let's turn now to Mr. Lederer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony. And again, during my opening remarks, I wanted to focus first on something that appears on page 32 of the IRT report. And in paragraph 3, it says, during the planning process, there were situations where JCCIC communicated to the various planners through the United States Capitol Police. The report recommends that there be direct, and they added some emphasis there, so I guess they really meant direct, communication between the governing bodies and the Executive Steering Committee. And Director Sullivan, do you know the genesis of that recommendation and what it's referring to?
I believe the recommendation on that is based on the fact that I think most of the interaction with the JSIC was maybe through the Capitol Police, and we wanted to have a more, the whole strength of an NSSE is the Executive Steering Committee, and this is where we have the main components of the planners. And in this particular event, we neglected to include them on that committee, and we've seen now that it would be best to have them directly on the committee for future events up here.
Okay. And Chief, do you agree with that recommendation?
Well, as I read that recommendation, I just want to be clear that with respect to interaction of Capitol Police with these other entities, that is specifically related to security. And as I know it, JSIC does interact with these entities with things such as protocol, ceremonial issues, logistics, and such. So I believe that is the way we would like to see it, that we, as the security experts, make recommendations and are a part of, the overall planning process, and that, JSIC continue to have their relationship with these other entities with regard to protocols and logistics and ceremonies and such.
Okay. Chairman Wasserman Schultz was talking a little bit about tickets and too many tickets for the space and so forth and so on. My mother-in-law called me and was all mad because her sister got invited to the inaugural. And I said, what are you talking about? Your sister got invited to the inaugural. And she had not, in fact, been invited to the inaugural. She didn't have a ticket for the event. She got this gold embossed thing that said, please, we invite you to the inauguration of the 44th President of the United States. Who controls that stuff? I mean, I think that some people thought that they, woohoo, and maybe it came from the President himself. Woohoo, the President's invited me down to see him being sworn in. So who initiates that stuff aside from the tickets, and can't we sort of look to word it differently, like, sample only, or don't present this at the gate, or something like that? Chief?
Yeah, we had mentioned in our testimony about unticketed guests.
Right.
Certainly there were people who had no ticket at all.
Right.
But there were people who had a very nice commemorative invitation to the swearing-in of the President of the United States.
Right.
And they were certainly there to utilize that ticket.
Right.
And we were tactfully and expending a lot of manpower and effort deconflicting that as people came to the gates. So certainly that is something that has to be very cautiously approached, especially issuing those prior to the inauguration, or at the very least given some sort of direction that that is not in fact the ticket that gets you into the event.
Well, and I appreciate that. Maybe we'll get it right the next time. And maybe, Chief, if you could call my mother-in-law, you'd save me a lot of heartache. I want to, again, commend the Capitol Hill Police and the Secret Service, but the Capitol Hill Police, my understanding is that your officers worked a 16-hour day that day. While I think it's appropriate to have oversight and figure out what went right and what went wrong, I don't want anybody on your force to misconstrue the message, at least that I'm trying to convey, and that is that that's a long day with a lot of people, and I think that you deserve to have our chance. Last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a lot of experience with crowd control. My only experience occurred one day. The Ku Klux Klan wanted to come to my hometown, and I was the prosecutor at the time. And the crowd wasn't the KKK, because there was only 6 fat guys in sheets. It was all the people that wanted to come and do harm to them that we had to control. And the way that the Sheriff's Department handled it at that time was to push back the perimeters. And as I look at these satellite photos and the gates and everything else, do you think that pushing back the perimeters to sort of get rid of the people like my mother-in-law's sister that has come with a phony invitation, or the people that just showed up and hadn't heard you needed a ticket, do you think that pushing back the perimeters would be in order based upon this experience, or no?
First, we actually pushed the perimeters back from previous inaugurations just for this reason. We have well, that doesn't really depict the area that of the purple gate, but it is in that location. You can see that with the areas that we picked for screening are the most accessible and the largest open space that we could find within the Capitol complex to facilitate screening of this sort. Before, they were much closer in and limited that. So we did make an effort. The only thing I would caution, and I think we probably need to examine it more closely, is as we push this out, we're simply pushing the choke point out. So we need to really examine what caused the choke points, which I think the recommendations identify, and really work on limiting the merging of crowds that are trying to get to a variety of different locations. The security simply bifurcates the city in a manner that is hard to get 1.8 million people to the areas that they need to be.
Right.
No,
Thank you.
Congressman, here's what I would like to just offer a point on that, because I do think we do have to push out where we're identifying people and where they should be coming from. I do think what happened here is that a lot of people were allowed to come in too close who didn't have a ticket, who had a commemorative ticket, who were general public, or quite frankly may have been lost. And I think those people, and I think by using wayfinders, and I think by using non-law enforcement people who would be out there as far as maybe Union Station. I mean, I think you have to go out that far to begin to identify these people, and that's where we have to be better with the signage and better with direction, because I do think when you look at the fence line and you look at all those people that couldn't get in, a lot of them are there, quite frankly, because they were intermingled with people that weren't ticketed.
Right.
So I do think when you look at the evolution of the inauguration over the last 3 inaugurations now, the perimeter has gone further and further out, and a lot of that is because of the terrorist threat.
Right.
And I do think if we're anticipating the type of crowd that we got on this one, I do think that further out we have to do a better job of figuring out who the people are who should be allowed to come in, and the other people that need to be directed to go to other checkpoints.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, and once again, I want to thank you for the long hours that occurred during that time. But I also need to let you know that I just went through my 20 counties in February, and there were some that were very pleased, but there were some that went through those gates that there was trouble, that it was a nightmare for them. Some that showed up at 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and still couldn't get in. And Chief, you were responsible for saying no to the National Guard?
Yes.
Just want you to acknowledge that, knowing full well that this was an extraordinary event that was occurring, where I was telling my people, if you don't have a room, if you're living far away, some came and actually stayed overnight in the area. Knowing that also, who determined, Chief, were you also responsible for determining the hours when the gates were going to be open? Who determined that hour?
Well, we actually opened the gates 2.5 hours earlier than they were expected to be open. So
You actually opened them 2 hours earlier?
the ticket hours were 9 a.m., and we opened the gates as early as 7:30 and the latest at 8:10. So we opened the gates earlier. And in fact, we also backed up our reporting times for our police officers. My police officers spent the night in cars and here in the building so that they could be here at 3 a.m., and they were on post no later than 4 a.m.
You know, I want to acknowledge that, but knowing that full well, I want you to reconsider the fact that you said no to the National Guard that could have been helpful. In addition, you know I looked at one of the areas out here as they were coming in. The gates were still closed, and I was looking because I know my daughter was waiting to come in one of the areas, you know, and thank God she was able to get in, but there's a large number of others that weren't. And that could have been extremely helpful for someone to have taken care of that in advance. Let me ask you, one of the gates, we had some stories about the generator malfunctioning, and there was no backup system. Is that correct?
Was that at the Blue Gate?
Yeah, there was a generator that failed at the beginning of our screening at 8 a.m., and we corrected that by immediately working with the Secret Service, our partners, going to hand wanding and purse checking, baggage checks, et cetera.
And if it's because of, you know, was you didn't have a backup generator, is that because of the lack of resources that we're giving you, or?
No, sir, we were back up at 8:10 a.m. That went down at 8.
Okay, so that was not, so then what, in your conclusion, what caused the problems in the Blue Gate, in the silver and purple area?
Well,
Because some of the others didn't have that problem.
right, as we indicated in the report and our review, there were multiple cascading events, such as people trying to get through the southbound tube of the tunnel to get to the north and south sides of the mall. The parade route closed at 10 a.m. to capacity.
Did we have a responsibility to distinguish the people that were coming to those gates, whether they had tickets or not? Or is that something, you know, because people are going to come. They're going to try to find out where they're going through. And it's a responsibility for us to communicate and dialogue and be able to, at least among the people that if they have a purple ticket, to head them in the right direction.
We in fact did that with our wayfinders and
Okay,
police
so why
officers.
do we have trouble on this side and not on some of the other side?
Well,
Is it the people in charge of those sections?
no, it's actually a great analogy because, for instance, the orange and yellow gates, we did not have significant issues there, and the screening of those people had concluded by about 11:20. The crowds were screened in. That's because there are not the converging of crowds trying to get into the parade route, get onto the mall, and people who are traversing from north to south. So there's we have, if you take away the ticketed people, the 241,000 from 1.8 million, you've got about 1.6 million people trying to get to the parade route or the mall from various locations.
On the tickets, you all, I think you're the ones that gave us instruction not to hand them out until almost the Friday before or the day before. So you knew that those who had the tickets were going to be here and showing up.
Absolutely, and as a matter of fact, our officers worked through the weekend and on the holiday in order to screen those
Because we
people
made
in to
it
get their
difficult
tickets.
for them also to access their tickets, and I understood that. Let me ask you one other question. Who set the guidelines as to who could come into the, with cars and who couldn't? Because the other issue was overall after the people got here. I know some, we might have not had any serious incidents, but a lot of people were hospitalized because some of them could not get access to just buying food. And the required people that were needed in the restaurants and those kind of things. Did anybody give that any thought?
Congressman, we did. We met twice with Governor O'Malley, Governor Kane, and Mayor Fenty, and one of the big issue was we were very concerned with the traffic coming in from Virginia, in Maryland, and how we'd be able to deal with it here in the district. And we all concluded that if we did not have some type of a traffic plan, that we would have more vehicles here in the district than they'd be able to handle.
Because one of the restaurants told me that they were going to close and not even be open on that day. And so people had access, had some difficulty in being able to get food. And can I just mention one other item, please?
Very quickly, please.
I wanted to attend the parade. There was no way we could attend the parade because we either had to, it was cold, but we either had to go from the inaugural, walk all the way over there, and then basically find some way of walking because there was no way of transporting. So that's, was another issue, and that's why I think President Obama was seen in the stands by himself and no one else in the stands there watching the parade at all. And part of that also was trying to get access to food after the event.
Mr. Congressman, we tried to be very proactive. We had a press conference on what the traffic plan would be. I had not heard that regarding the food because we had worked with HHS on that very topic to make sure that there was enough water and food for all those that needed it. And
I'm sure.
No, this was for the attendees, sir. This was for, they made, they had weigh stations, as I understand it, for all the attendees, but that was something, we had a subcommittee that dealt with nothing but that particular public health issues. And they worked hand in hand with our transportation committee to ensure that those who were either with any type of disability would not have to walk a long distance, that they would be accommodated as well. And that was something that the executive steering committee and the subcommittees who oversaw those particular issues really paid a lot of attention to.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to a couple of examples from the Silver Gate. And I realize in reading these accounts that some of this is probably inevitable in the event of a crowd of this magnitude. So that the challenge is to sort out what could have been prevented or facilitated. Acknowledging that people are going to have to wait in line for a long time, probably under any circumstances. But let's just think about these two accounts. When we emerged from the metro station, there were several red-capped volunteers to point us toward the silver ticket line. During the long wait in line, there was no one on the street, no volunteers, no security officers to tell us what was going on. No one checked our tickets or bags. Another account, we were in a line that stretched for blocks near L'Enfant Station when we heard that the ticket checking system had broken down. We then got out of line, that is the line for the silver area, and went directly down Constitution and went right through security. A volunteer explained the tickets were not being checked. Another one says once they finally got to the gate, no one asked to see the tickets. A couple of questions I think arise from this. One has to do with the way the silver, the kind of planning that was done for the silver ticketed area. Now that was supposed to hold 100,000 visitors. The original plan called for multiple entry gates, both on the north and the south sides of the mall. But after the tickets were printed, the plan was changed so the silver area would have only one entry gate on the south side. I just find that inexplicable. I can't imagine what led to that decision. We've learned from the after-action report that the crowds of silver ticket holders awaiting entry spilled into crowds awaiting entry to other ticketed areas, creating a vast mob in which people didn't know what line to get in and whether they were actually in line at all. So that does lead us to question some of this planning and why the number of entries to the largest section of the viewing areas was reduced in this way. What can either of you explain that decision, and what do you mean by your recommendation that this issue, quote, should be addressed by future planners? What does that mean? And then the second question that I think arises from this has to do with the shortage of ticket checkers and line managers. Before the attendees reach the magnetometers. Now, I understand the Secret Service and the TSA managed the metal detectors, but the Capitol Police were the ones handling line management and ticket checking. Chief, how many officers were stationed at each checkpoint to validate tickets? How many officers were outside? We've already addressed this partially to manage the lines. You've already said you thought the people performing that latter function were obviously not enough. Did the Secret Service ever compare its resource plan for staff at the checkpoints with the Capitol Police resource plan? Were those resource levels similar? So two questions about the kind of experiences we've recounted here. One has to do with the reduction of the number of entry gates, the second having to do with the number of people assigned to the ticket checking function, and in the end, I have many reports here that tickets were never checked, but of course people thought they were going to be checked, and so most of the morning they were waiting in line to have that done.
Mr. Chairman, according to the information I have, we had 43 lanes of to check those coming through, and this was more of a, we have different levels of security, and the further out you went, the levels of security would be commensurate with what we felt to be the threat. At this particular checkpoint, as I understand it, we were not doing any putting people through magnetometers. We're doing more of a pat-down and a waistband.
This is the silver area, which is
yes,
the
yes,
farthest ticketed area from the
yes,
platform.
This would be west of the reflecting, pretty far west of the reflecting pool.
So no magnetometer checking was taking place there at all?
This was more of a pat-down and a waistband check. And we had 143 officers there to do that.
Okay, but one entry point, is that true?
It was one entry point. We reduced it, and and again, that was based on a decision between the U.S. Capitol Police and the U.S. Secret Service, and we felt that we did not want to have the ticketed and non-ticketed guests sharing a common screening checkpoint. And to avoid anticipated congestion at 3rd Street and Constitution Avenue and commingling of the silver and purple ticket holders and other non-ticketed parade viewers, a decision was made to have all silver ticket holders and other non-ticketed guests going through the National Mall enter their viewing areas from the south. We didn't. So what we did, we did not want to. We wanted everyone going into the silver to come from the south and not get congested with those that were going into the purple. So what we were looking for these people to do was to come through the south tunnel, and then come up south of the mall and enter from that location. We felt having these other checkpoints open north of that location would have just added more congestion.
Added more congestion to what? To the
purple. You know, we
purple points to the east.
Purple, which would have been to the south. Purple that would have been to the would have been to the north.
I'm sorry, to the north. I mean,
to the north.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, we already, and as it turned out, I do think that we're right on that decision to have people. You know, what we wanted to do is have anybody who was north take the south tunnel, come through that south tunnel, and come south of the mall, and then enter from that location. And if we had tried to bring these people through, you know, at the, for example, the 3rd Street crossover there, which we had to shut down, it would have been an even bigger mess. So I do believe that was the right decision to have the silver ticket holders come from the south using the tunnel. The tunnel worked fine. Anyone coming through the tunnel, they had no trouble coming through the south tunnel to get to the silver, as I understand it.
At the time the tickets were printed, though, these plans were, there were plans to have multiple entry points. And
Right,
so
and that was another one of our recommendations, why these tickets should not be printed so early. And again, 4 years ago, that plan would have worked perfectly. This year, with the historic nature of the election and the number of people that were going to come here, that plan just did not work that was on the ticket. And I do believe an addendum went out to clarify that for people, but I'm just not sure everybody got the word on that.
Well, just looking at the map here, I can't understand for the life of me why a concern about congestion in the purple area, which is on the north side of the standing area just in front of the reflecting pool.
You know,
Why that would have required closing all the entrances to the silver area, which is a number of yards farther.
that's why we wanted everyone to come from the
west.
south. I mean, if everyone had come from the north to get to the silver, they would have run smack into that crowd. I think there was a photo that you showed up earlier that showed a huge crowd, and those people would have walked right into that crowd of people if we had them come in that way.
Yeah, if I could, sir, I hope this is helpful as well, is that on the north side of the Capitol, you have the yellow and purple gates, which is a level of screening. It's the highest level of screening takes place.
Yes, sir.
The same level of screening takes place at the parade route. Therefore, if you had silver ticket holders, not only would you have additional congestion using the D Street corridor, the southbound tube, there would be no way for them to cross over the parade route, and they would be screened at a higher level necessary, which would have caused, more delays for those who were getting into the parade route and the purple and yellow seated areas.
Well, was your original plan to not have magnetometers for the people in the silver area, but to check tickets? Or were tickets, was the original plan not to even check tickets for that area? I mean, the people otherwise will indiscriminately go into that area.
The level of screening was decided in advance, and certainly ticket checks. Now, ground situations, depending on it's just complete situational, could dictate that instead of causing an angry crowd or perhaps holding the line up even longer than it should be, that people who were security screened but did not have a ticket got through. But that could be just a situational thing where an officer or our screeners do not want to, cause any additional chaos or harm to anyone.
All right. What about the personnel assigned to ticket checking? Have you had any? What kind of assessment have you made of that, and as to whether that was a problem or a factor in backing up these lines?
Well, I think that we collectively looked at how many lanes we had going in, and we placed a number of people there to check tickets to keep those lanes full, so that the screeners would have people to check. There were also Capitol police officers who maintained, obviously, the perimeter and security within the silver ticketed area, and that's well over 100 officers.
Well, from the data provided in the report, your planning indicated that even under ideal conditions, it would have taken 3 hours and 45 minutes to process all blue and purple ticket holders, and about 3 hours and 10 minutes to process all silver ticket holders. I assume that's the combination of the pre-screening and the magnetometers. The gates were open, of course, only for a total of 4 hours. That was cutting it pretty close, wasn't it, even under ideal conditions?
Yeah, it does. We used a matrix, for instance, to decide the width of access points so that we could have the right flow to the screeners. And the screeners and the Secret Service, as well as the Capitol Police, who have a lot of experience in screening, certainly, looked at this, from a science, and opening the gates earlier than expected helped us alleviate any concern with, pushing the time too close. So opening it up 2.5 hours earlier gave us more time to operate within the time frame that we had originally set.
Still gave you 4 hours, though. And your own planning here says that under ideal conditions, it's going to take 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Well, and we had opened, and again, those tickets were printed before. I think whoever printed the tickets understood the severity of the number of people we're going to have, and that's why we made an adjustment and had the magnetometers open at 7:30 a.m. So they were up and running at 7:30 a.m., starting to take people in. So we did adjust for that, but the fact is, Mr. Chairman, that the tickets were already printed prior to us coming up with that plan. And again, that's why we made that a recommendation that there needs to be better coordination there.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to get back to the purple tunnel of doom. What you expressed earlier regarding police directing people into the tunnel, there's video of people doing that, of police directing people into that tunnel. I mean, the clarification that you made, where you said people belonged in the southbound tunnel, but not in the northbound tunnel, and as if everything was fine in terms of the separation. The separation is a painted line between southbound and northbound.
This separation is very distinct. It's a wall.
It's a full wall?
Yeah, it's a full wall. It's a tunnel system, as if you would go through, for instance, the Baltimore tunnel.
Is it a median or a barrier, or?
There's no.
It's an enclosed wall?
It's an enclosed wall. It's a tube.
What was, when you say police, when we say police were directing them into the northbound tunnel, which police? MPD?
I believe that the Metropolitan Police Civil Disturbance Unit went to that tunnel to help alleviate pedestrian flow in and around the area of D Street, 2nd and D, 1st and D, and found the people in the northbound tube. And as the report indicates, made some attempts at trying to alleviate that problem, but were not successful. And they...
well, Chief, what happened? Sure. I mean, I know barriers didn't show up because a truck broke down. What steps were taken when there were no barriers to prevent people from filling the tunnel? What steps were taken to deal with that? I mean, the MPD was responsible for both ends of the tunnel? Is that right? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so since people didn't belong in there, and there were supposed to be barriers to prevent them from being in there, did MPD take any steps to, or once they filled the tunnel, that was it? It was not a controllable or fixable situation, and that was it?
Yes, ma'am. That's what the report would indicate.
Okay. Well, do you know enough now about how and what happened with the filling of that tunnel, so that we don't have son of purple tunnel of doom in 2013?
Well, I think what we all have learned from that is that whenever there are areas that we do not want people, we must either put physical barriers or police officers there to prevent that from happening.
But in the event of an unanticipated problem like this one was, where a truck broke down and barriers didn't show up, why was there, who was responsible for just deciding that barriers weren't going to be replaced?
I think what happened here, Chairman, is I think a couple of unfortunate things happened here that really contributed to making this what it was. Truck didn't show up to put the barriers down. General public began to go into the tunnel, and they were very orderly, and they started an ad hoc line. And I think that When the police found out that they were down there, I think among all of us, there was very poor communication. I think this is an example of some real poor communication here. I think that those officers who went down there with every good intention of doing the right thing. They went down there to make sure that there were no safety issues, but I just don't think that they were aware of the.
I mean, I can appreciate that, Director Sullivan, but that is not a situation that was safe, as orderly as that crowd was, because the crowd just could just as easily have gotten extremely frustrated. They were trapped in a tunnel with no police really around them to be able to get them out or move them along. No idea. I mean, I can only imagine being trapped in a tunnel that you weren't supposed to be in. So have you taken steps? How would you address this problem and prevent it from happening again in the next inauguration?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one, we would shut that tunnel down a lot earlier than we had originally anticipated shutting it down. People showed up there earlier, and I think at this point we would shut that down the night before. Would have the blockades up the night before, and I believe that we'd make sure that everybody had situational awareness of what that tunnel is all about. I believe what happened. I think that the police and obviously the people that were queued up in that line felt that that line was going to lead to the Purple Gate.
But was it MPD's decision not to replace or do something about the barriers not showing up?
I think what happened was by the time their vehicle was vandalized that was going to put the barriers up, by the time it got there, people were already queued up, and people just, they let it go. When people that were in the tunnel called back to the MAC to let them know that they were having issues in the tunnel, the people in the MAC were under the impression they were talking about the south tunnel because the people in the MAC knew that the north tunnel was not going to be open. So when they heard tunnel, they called over to the people at the south tunnel and said, can you check that tunnel? We heard there's issues there, and they saw that there was a perfect flow of people. Believe it or not, nobody took a look at the north tunnel. And I, as I said before, I apologize for that.
That's a big ball drop.
That's a big mistake. That is a big mistake, and all of us take responsibility for that mistake. All of us regret it, and all of us apologize to those people. I think it's something that we could have adjusted to that day, and yeah, there's no defending it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, before my time expires, I want to suggest that there are a lot of questions. I don't know how many rounds we're going to go, but there are a lot of questions that have been raised today, some that have been answered. And I see Chairman Serrano is here, who is responsible for the District of Columbia, and I serve on that committee as the vice chair. Mr. Chairman, from the questions that have been raised today, I think we may want to consider having a hearing, at least where we have an opportunity to ask the chairman, the Metro Police Chief, some questions about the decision making that they engaged in on that day, and that caused so many people to miss the opportunity to see the inauguration. I go back.
Thank you, Mr. Latourette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. and I would echo Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz's observations. I think it might be helpful to have the folks from the JCCIC here as well, because Director Sullivan, something that I wrote down when you're talking about the logistics and how long the gates were required to be open based upon your metrics and so forth and so on. I wrote down, you said whoever printed the tickets didn't check to make sure that the time printed on the tickets coordinated with what the metrics were showing. Is that what you meant to say?
What I meant to say is I think when those tickets were printed, I don't think any of us truly appreciated the magnitude of this event and the number of people were going to come. And we had to adjust to those numbers well after the tickets had been printed.
Right. So going back to my first round of questions about this recommendation on page 32, do you think that sort of fixes it? Better coordination, that the ticket guys know that you can't put 9 o'clock on the ticket, you really need to put 7:45 on the ticket?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. When we do the DNC and we do the RNC, we have members of the DNC and the RNC on our executive steering committee. Again, they don't really deal with security issues, but they deal with issues that do impact the logistics of the event. And that's why we believe it would be worthwhile for the PIC, for the AFIC, and
JCIC.
right, for the JCIC to all be on that, all on that steering committee.
Yep, me too. Let me ask you this.
And again, those tickets, they were printed in July of 2008.
Yeah. And I have to join Mr. Rodriguez. I don't get, for instance, I mean, this is my 4th inauguration since I've been here. I've always gotten 198 tickets. I think I'm going to die, and I'll still get 198 tickets. So it's really not a surprise how many tickets each member is going to get, and I assume the Senate runs the same way, except they don't seem to have any rules, so maybe it doesn't apply. But I don't know. I don't know why we can't figure it out when the tickets are printed, that here we're going to go and move forward, and why it has to be top secret, and, you know, we can't get the tickets until 3 days before the event. And it would be a lot more orderly if I could have, you know, mailed them back to Ohio. People would come in and pick them up rather than trying to scramble into the Rayburn building. But let me ask you, has anybody ever thought about the notion of coming into the 21st century and putting barcodes in the tickets? And, you know, that's how I go to the Indians games. Could you put barcodes in the tickets, and it wouldn't identify you as your seat, but it would say purple, 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 blue, 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 and maybe that would help with some of the screening, and then the police officers and the Secret Service and everybody else could sort of concentrate on looking at threats, which you're highly trained to do. But I think you get anybody to come, you know, run a barcode through a scanner. So were barcodes ever thought about?
No, I mean, I think that's a great idea, but again, I also think, no matter if you know, what you use with technology, I still think that what we have to do a better job with is dealing with these large crowds of people that don't come ticketed,
Right.
that come with what they think is a ticket and isn't a ticket. These people need to be separated further out, and I think that's where we could have done a much better job, is separating those people further.
Well, that's why I asked the perimeter question, but I think that you weed those people out further out if you move the perimeters back, and if you do barcodes, you know, again, my mother-in-law's sister ain't getting through with her gold thing because she doesn't have a barcode, and it's really not a ticket to the event. As I look at the map that the chairman's provided, the committee's provided, the east front of the Capitol seems pretty underutilized, and I know that there's a big deal about, you know, the new president, the old president walk out and they shake hands and say goodbye and hello, but is there a reason that we don't use the east front of the Capitol for egress and ingress?
You know, one of the things, you know, that's where we use the helicopter departure from, and that would be an emergency evacuation area there. And, you know, we do have a lot of people. We have our new president, we have our departing president, we have other dignitaries here, and that, from our perspective, anyway, and I will defer to the chief from his perspective.
And I appreciate that. And Chief, before you answer that question, and maybe the whole notion of maybe using it on a way in, but not as a way out, because my understanding is that when the parade ends, the president comes there, and when they leave through the east front. But if you had moved if you would consider moving your orange and your yellow gates up to and creating kidneys up there for people just to walk around the sides of the Capitol to come in, but you don't let them back out that way, maybe you free up some space, or you just don't think we should use the east front at all, based on security.
Yeah, security, I think, rules in this respect. We also have, it's more, we don't have a fixed location that can protect our dignitaries there. It's open air. The ceremonies that take place on the east front, reviewing of the troops and such, we have to make sure that not only on the ground but at a distance that we have that covered, and to put more people in that area for law enforcement to be distracted with or have to deal with would place a higher level of risk on that.
Okay. Well, that's what I figured, but it's a big open space that wasn't used. So for my 2 cents is push the perimeters back, put barcodes on it, and stop sending out fancy things that really aren't tickets. So thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Is this on? Let me just indicate, I do want to thank you, and I know the long hours that occurred, but I'm also concerned, and I'm real pleased that nothing happened. I'm concerned if something had happened. You know, I hope we had some kind of emergency response, because we really didn't have that emergency response to the problem that we encountered, and and have additional staff that's ready to move and ready to go. Otherwise, we would have had a real serious situation in our hands. As we look at one of your recommendations, ticket checking in the future should be the function of the host committee. Is that volunteers or what? Who's that?
The host committee would be the JSIC up here at the Capitol.
So is that the volunteers handling that, or what? That's one of your recommendations? Tickets check-in in the future should be functions of the host committee, not the function of the law enforcement officials. That's a recommendation, I gather, that you're
It's-
making.
Yeah,
And to use an example of the RNC and the DNC at those conventions, tickets are not checked by law enforcement. Tickets are checked by the RNC and the DNC, and law enforcement does a law enforcement function. My opinion is ticket checking is not a law enforcement function. That is something that should be done by others, and in this particular case, I believe that should be a function handled by the JSIC or whoever they determine.
Which could mean volunteers, which could be another mess, if we're not careful in terms of how that's handled. If they're not non-paying, people that are not on a salary.
Again, we do that at other events that we go to. Historically, we've always done that at other events we've done, and these people are given training. They're informed what is expected of them, and my experience has been that they perform this duty in a very capable manner.
Okay. In terms of the coordinating, have you all, the recommendations in terms of coordinating, and any other recommendations in terms of maybe additional staffing and resources what are some of the things that we need to do to help you make sure we get the job done and that we're ready to respond to some serious situations?
well, I think one reason that we're under the NSSC structure is so that we can have the assets and resources that we need to perform this level of event. We certainly, with the recommendations that we have learned that a focus on security should be as high a focus on, the logistics of people. And we need to figure out a way to rectify that situation by some of the recommendations that we have made. We believe will do that.
You could have figured out that if a member of Congress, I had close to 1,800 people wanting those 180-something tickets. I went through a screening process. Those people were going to show up. We knew that. Why didn't you know that? And I'm serious. Why didn't you know that?
Sir, we knew those people were going to show up. What we didn't know was, for example, we had thousands of people who took a bus to RFK Stadium, and the plan was for them to take a shuttle. Many of those people decided that they weren't going to take the shuttle and they were going to walk. And when they walked, they converged with the purple ticket holders. We had no way of knowing that those people were going to do that. We were caught short, and again, we're going to have to do better.
But because I knew also, and I was telling people, look, even if you're far away in Maryland, you're going to have a rough time coming in. And we had a feel that it was going to be something extraordinary, in terms of the numbers.
And again, a lot of the people we dealt with, sir, were not people that were just coming to the Capitol. A lot of people that came into this flow of other people, or people that went to the mall, couldn't get into the mall, and then migrated down here.
But that was expected. That was expected, because I'm telling you, I had hundreds of others that were coming out here without a ticket, not to mention the ones with the ticket. And that's just one member, so I gather the same applied to every single member. So we had some kind of a feel. So my concern is that if we kind of knew that now, and you seem to talk as if we didn't expect this crowd and that kind of thing, and this thing to occur, if we expect a problem to arise, we got to have a team to respond to it. I'm sure if we had a shooting, you would have had a team out there real quickly, right? I hope so.
We would have, and again, I do think that we could have used more people, but I also think we could have used more room. I think that people were allowed to come too close in, and by the time all these people came in that were either ticketed or non-ticketed, or people with a commemorative ticket, I believe it was very difficult to separate these people, and that's why one of the recommendations is that we do begin to separate these people out further, that we do have non-law enforcement people dealing with the ticket, and having better information for the people as they approach, better signage for the people. Congressman, I'm telling you, I agree with what you're saying. There are some things here we could have done better in the planning, and there are things we could have done better the day of the event to react to what was not going right, either communication-wise or operationally. We know that we know that there were some shortcomings here.
And
believe
thank
me,
God everything went okay, and I do want to thank you for, but there was just some experiences where some people spent a lot of their money to come up here and didn't have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Serrano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your service, and thank you for being here today. I think that Mr. Rodriguez's last point has to be well understood. This can't become a discussion only of how to handle a large event. This was a historic event. I had people coming from my district in the Bronx who were over 90 years old. I honestly told them that this was going to be tough, standing or sitting for a long time, that it was going to be cold. But this was a historic moment that we've all well understood, and they were not going to miss it. And I think as we look forward to the next inauguration, or the next time we have such a historic moment in our country, that we need to take that into consideration. It can't just be how do we handle this and what are the logistics we're handling. We also have to prepare for the fact that this was going to be huge. This was going to be emotional. This was going to be important. This is the people that did get in. I had a bunch of constituents, large number that couldn't get in, but those that did get in, all I hear from them and all I read from them is, I will never, ever, ever forget this. In fact, one of the older ones said, I can now leave. I've seen it. That's the kind of emotion behind this, and that's why so many people are concerned that it didn't go well. The other point I'd like to make is, and I don't know if this was answered while I was away, Washington, D.C. is known for large demonstrations, large gatherings. That's part of what we do in this town. Was it that this one was bigger than expected? Was it that this one was the largest ever? Or was it that just one didn't work as well as the others? I would think that if 500,000 people are showing up to a rock concert and you prepare for it, that the same logistics, the same mechanics would apply in larger numbers if 1.5 million show up. So what was the problem? That it was too big, or people didn't think that many people were showing up?
Well, I think there were several differences between our normal, the normal events that occur here in the city. For instance, when we had Million Man March, we had 600,000-700,000 people here in the city, but it wasn't bifurcated by security. We didn't have different areas of security that were fenced off, that streets were closed. It was more of a wide open space. Therefore, all the transportation systems could be used. The streets were open to flow north and south. Traffic continued to flow on the freeways and the 3rd Street tunnels, or through the tunnels that we were speaking of earlier. That's the biggest difference, along with the fact that it was almost triple that size. All those factors came into play on the 20th, and that was the major differences there.
Also, I think that your statements speak to a summary, executive summary of the report coming out. When will the full report be available to the American people?
That's why we put the executive summary together. Now, we can take a look at the report that we've done, and if there's anything in there we believe should be classified, we'll keep it classified, but we'll be more than happy to work with the chairman and the committee to make that available.
You mean, in order to make the full report available, there has to be issues of security? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Right now, we have it classified as law enforcement sensitive. If you would allow me to take a few days to take a look at that and see if there's anything that we believe should not be released publicly, we'd be more than happy to release it.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
No, sir, I would like to say one thing, because the Metropolitan Police Department isn't here, but I would like, and I know that you do have oversight for them, but I would like to say that I think they did an extraordinary job. And we talk about the 3rd Street Tunnel. I do want to make it clear that what went well in this inauguration was a collective effort, and what didn't go well was a collective effort as well. And I do want to make sure that what went wrong with the 3rd Street Tunnel wasn't because of the Metropolitan Police Department. It was because of the action or the inaction that all of our agencies took. So, you know, Chief Lanier is not here, but I have the utmost regard for her in the department. And I do want to make sure that, you know, I did say that to you.
Well, and you know, and we're not here as adversaries. We're just trying to make sure this never happens again. What happened, happened. We have to prepare for it. But when you have a Supreme Court justice messing up the swearing in, you know that a lot of things could go wrong.
If I could also echo the Director Sullivan's remarks, Kathy Lanier was up many a night worrying about this inauguration, and the night before the inauguration, I spent some time with her, and she was worried about not only the jurisdiction that she was responsible for, but also the ones that myself and Director Sullivan were responsible for. And we do all take responsibility for the shortcomings that happened here, and we regret that. The police officers with the Metropolitan Police responded up to the Hill that day to assist us with crowd control, especially in the silver ticketed area. They were very responsive to that, and I think that their actions in the 3rd Street Tunnel after finding people there at the officer and supervisory level, they did what they thought was right and all good intention. And once they saw that there wasn't any glaring safety issues or anyone that was in trouble, they attempted to make some direction there and then moved on to the D Street corridor to try to help alleviate that. And eventually we were able to obviously unclog the tunnel around 11 o'clock. So Chief Lanier is a good friend of ours and a good chief, and her people deserve a lot of credit for that day as well.
Thank you. We are nearing the closing hour here, but Chairman Wasserman Schultz and I think, want to make certain that we pursue one very critical matter, and Mr. Rodriguez has already broached the subject, and let me just take his question a couple of steps further. It has to do with what the plans were and what the capacity was had a truly disastrous event materialized.
You know, under the sorry.
And so let me try to frame it this way. There's a number of things we've heard from your report and also from people we've communicated with about what they observed. The dearth of officers, couldn't be seen in the large crowds, megaphones not effective for communicating, too few direction finding signs. All this created some confusion and chaos just with respect to the formation of lines and the entry to the event. But also, all of these things also have serious implications for the capacity to handle a disastrous event should it arise. What kind of thinking have you done about how you would have responded, how you could have responded to a catastrophic event like a bombing or you know, a man-made or natural event, an explosion of some sort, whatever kind of catastrophic event might have really caused widespread panic and disruption. Director Sullivan, what was the plan for evacuating people out of the downtown area if there had been a security event, for example? Given the problems getting individuals to the mall, how could we conceive of getting them out of the area in a timely manner? You've spoken about the east portion of the Capitol as an evacuation area. You might want to expand on that a bit. Chief, what kind of response and evacuation plan did you test or rehearse before the event? What kind of scenarios did you envision? You know, I think we're all in awe of the numbers you were dealing with here and just the sheer scale and scope of this event. And so routine crowd management proved to be sometimes beyond our capability. But what about this catastrophic scenario? That's really the question we have to ask, I think.
You know, as I mentioned before, we have an executive steering committee, and under that executive steering committee for the inauguration, we had 23 working groups. One of the working groups we had was a transportation subcommittee that had 15 agencies, law enforcement agencies, as part of that, and what they looked at was a mass exodus plan for this type of an event. You know, we had 30 medical stations within these secure areas, as well as we had mobile hospital as well. When you, there was a walkout plan. If there was some type of a catastrophic event, there was a walkout plan where people would, we had, I think, 23 jumbo screens, jumbotrons out there that would give direction to people, as well as there'd be verbal direction by law enforcement. And depending on where that particular event was, people would be instructed to walk in a direction that would be going away from the threat or from that particular event. That was one of the big reasons why we did meet with the governors from Virginia and with Maryland, as well as with Mayor Fenty, to make sure we didn't have so much vehicular traffic here, so that if we did have to evacuate the city, we wouldn't have all these vehicles trying to leave at the same time. Now, you can well imagine with 1.8 or 2 million people, we're not going to be able to stop on a dime, but a lot of work, and we can give you, more than happy to give you a classified briefing on that particular plan. But there was a plan in place for that, and as a matter of fact, we did tabletop that plan. You know, we did several tabletop exercises leading up to the inauguration, and two of those had to do with, you know, many of the scenarios we looked at had to do with a catastrophic event. So I feel comfortable that that we did have a plan in place for that. But I will, when I look at the Capitol Mall, for example, 2 hours after the inauguration was over, law enforcement was able to clear that mall area. It took 2 hours to clear that out. But again, it was in a very orderly fashion that all of those people did leave. But I do want to assure you that there was a plan in place for that, and I would be more than happy to go in more depth with that with you in a classified briefing.
Just a very brief follow-up to Chairman Price's question. So you think it's realistic to expect that in a crowd that size, 1.8 million to 2 million, that in the event that there was some type of man-made disaster or terrorist attack, that you had an evacuation plan for both the leadership, the President, the Congress, and the crowd that would have been effective?
I believe we had the best plan in place, and now again, depending on what that event is and how
Right,
many, you know,
right.
do you have one event, 2 events, 3
Hard
events?
to gauge in
know,
hypotheticals.
But I do believe, again, I can't guarantee you that with 2 million people that everything is going to go according to
Right.
plan. But I do think that we tried to look at every scenario and do it in the safest way we could. And
So at the end of the day, it just seems like between J6, I mean, I don't know, I don't really feel like this is taboo to say. One of the glaring problems beyond the ones we've identified here and that you've acknowledged is that JSIC bears some responsibility as well. I think much of their planning was wanting and would need to be reevaluated. And I'm assuming that you work with them as well, or do they make their own decisions on planning for the future?
I think that's why we believe that they need to be part of the executive steering committee. You know, again, the same way we do it with the DNC and the RNC, that we have those, as well as the PIC and the AFIC, be part of the executive steering committee. So we are hand in hand on these.
And they weren't before, is that right?
On this particular event, they were not part of the executive steering committee. Again, there was contact with them, and we did most of that through, or all of it through the Capitol Police.
But all of it being coordinated would.
I think if we want to improve, I think my opinion is anyway, I think they need to be part of the executive steering committee.
Thank you.
Chief, just to clarify, what was you and your agency's role in the response and evacuation planning? Was that the Secret Service's responsibility mainly, or were you responsibility, what kind of responsibility did you have, and did you undertake tabletop exercises, rehearsals, or were you just part of this coordinated effort?
This is a coordinated effort, and as far as the Capitol Hill Subcommittee is concerned, the U.S. Secret Service and the Capitol Police coordinate with each other, planning for security and evacuation and consequence management as it relates to any event that occurs. And in fact, we did have a joint steering committee tabletop exercise on Capitol Hill to address all the possible threats and actions that we would take should they occur.
All right. Well, thanks to both of you. Do our other members have remaining questions?
Let me just, once again, thank you for the service that you do provide for us. And I think the chairman indicated at the beginning, and one of the things that irritated me also was the comments that were made initially, by the, there wasn't any of you two, I think the one in charge of the DC that talked about the fact that everything was okay and there was no problems whatsoever, knowing full well that I was already getting called. People had been out there 7-8 hours and they had never had a chance to get in. And so hopefully we can learn from this experience. Now, as Americans, I'll just close with this. We're unique in a lot of ways. When you're in another country, most people don't form a line. We form a line to get on the bus, to do everything, and we're very orderly from that. So thank God everything went okay. Thank you.
Again, thank you. We look forward to working with you, and of course we have much more to talk about. Both of our subcommittees will have a great deal more to talk about with you as we look toward the 2010 budget. I think inevitably here today we focused on an area of shared responsibility and an episode that we need to get some clarity on and some understanding for future purposes. So we appreciate your cooperation in that, and on the many matters in which you serve our country. We thank you and look forward to working with you as we formulate our spending plans for 2010.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Subcommittee is adjourned.